The restaurant hummed with Friday night warmth, candles flickering on white linen, silverware chiming against porcelain in rhythm with muted laughter from couples who belonged. Julia Morgan sat frozen at table 12, staring at her phone like it might suddenly apologize for existing. The screen glowed with 2 messages from Trevor, the man she'd spent 3 weeks convincing herself was different. The one who'd written thoughtful paragraphs about his niece's birthday and asked real questions about her shift work at Portland General. 20 minutes early, she'd arrived wearing her mother's pearl-colored dress, the fabric soft from years in a cedar chest, the hem she'd repaired with invisible thread the night before. Her blonde hair held curls from 2 hours with a borrowed iron, her makeup applied with the careful precision of someone who couldn't afford to waste a single dollar of product. The first message had arrived at 7:15, exactly when he was supposed to walk through the door. "Wow, you actually showed up." The second came 30 seconds later, each word a small detonation. "I was just bored. You're not worth the gas money. P.S. Check your profile pic. You look desperate." Her jaw locked. The restaurant's ambient noise, glasses clinking, conversations overlapping, the soft jazz from overhead speakers, compressed into a single high-pitched frequency. She refused to cry. Not here. Not in front of strangers who'd remember the girl in the vintage dress who sat alone on a Friday night. Not in front of the couple 3 tables over who kept glancing at her with that particular mixture of pity and relief that they weren't her. Julia smoothed the napkin in her lap for the 4th time, her knuckles white against the navy fabric. At table 7, Marcus Hart lifted his scotch and watched the amber liquid catch the light. He'd finished his business dinner 40 minutes ago when his distribution partner canceled via text. Something about a family emergency that Marcus knew was code for a better offer from a competitor. The Macallan 18 was smooth, expensive, and completely failing to distract him from the spreadsheets waiting on his laptop or the parent-teacher conference he'd missed that afternoon because an FDA compliance call ran long. His charcoal suit still held the sharp lines from this morning's press. His watch, a birthday gift from Claire 3 years before the cancer, ticked quietly against his wrist. He should leave. Emma was home with Mrs. Patel, probably already in pajamas, probably asking when Daddy would read the next chapter of the fairy tale book they'd started Tuesday. But something about the young woman by the window had caught his attention the moment she'd walked in. Not her appearance, though the dress was clearly cherished, the kind of garment someone wore when they needed armor. It was the hope in her posture, the way she'd checked her reflection in the window glass before sitting, the small adjustments to her silverware that suggested this mattered. He recognized that particular species of bravery, the kind that required showing up even when every instinct screamed to stay invisible. He watched her face drain of color as she read something on her phone, watched her spine straighten like steel reinforcement, shoulders pulling back in defiance of whatever cruelty had just landed in her messages. The server approached her table for the 3rd time, a young man with apologetic body language who clearly needed the table for the couple waiting by the host stand. Julia reached for her small crossbody purse, worn leather, a strap repaired with careful stitching, and pulled out her wallet. Even from across the room, Marcus could see the thinness of it, the way her fingers hesitated before opening it. She extracted a 20 and 2 singles, placed them on the table, then stood with the careful dignity of someone who'd practiced leaving gracefully. Marcus caught the server's eye and gestured him over. A brief conversation, a quick exchange with the bartender, and the trajectory of the evening shifted. The server returned to Julia's table, carrying a plate of wild mushroom pasta with truffle oil and a glass of sparkling lemonade, the restaurant's signature mocktail. Julia had been halfway out of her chair, purse already over her shoulder, when the interruption came. The server set the plate down with professional efficiency. "Your order, miss." Julia blinked. "I didn't order anything." It's been taken care of. The server gestured vaguely toward the back of the restaurant. Someone requested it for you. Your tab is covered. Confusion rippled across her face, followed immediately by wariness. Julia scanned the room, her eyes moving past Marcus once, then returning when he stood. He didn't smile. That would have been condescending. Didn't wave. That would have been presumptuous. He simply met her gaze with the same steady observation he'd been giving her for the past 20 minutes, then walked over without waiting for permission. It's not charity. His voice carried the low, even timbre of someone used to speaking in boardrooms. It's a reminder that hunger doesn't care about heartbreak. Eat first, grieve later. Julia's eyes narrowed. The tears that had been threatening earlier had evaporated, replaced by something sharper. You don't know anything about me. I know you showed up. Marcus pulled out the chair across from hers, the one that should have held Trevor, and sat without asking. That's already more than he deserved. For a long moment, Julia didn't move. Her hand remained on her purse strap, her body angled toward the exit. Then something in her posture shifted. Not relaxation exactly, but a recalibration. She sat back down, slowly, and placed her purse in her lap like a small shield. Who are you? The question came out harder than curiosity, edged with the defensiveness of someone who'd learned that kindness from strangers usually carried a price tag. Someone who forgot what it felt like to show up for people. Marcus leaned back in his chair, giving her space. You reminded me. Julia's fingers found the fork, but she didn't lift it. That's not an answer. Marcus Hart. He offered his hand across the table. I run a food company, mostly organic products for kids. She studied his hand like it might be a trap, then shook it briefly. Her grip was stronger than he'd expected, the kind of handshake that came from lifting patients in hospital beds. Julia Morgan. I'm a nurse. Pediatrics. That explains it. Explains what? Why you're still sitting here instead of telling me to mind my own business. Marcus nodded toward the pasta. You're used to helping people who can't ask for it. Makes it harder to walk away when someone extends the same courtesy. Julia's mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something adjacent. She lifted the fork and took a small bite, and Marcus watched her shoulders drop half an inch as the first real food in what was probably days hit her system. She didn't eat like someone performing gratitude. She ate like someone who needed the fuel. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Marcus sipped his scotch. Julia worked through the pasta with methodical efficiency. The restaurant continued its Friday evening rhythm around them, oblivious to the small recalibration happening at table 12. Why did you really do this? Julia set down her fork, the plate 2/3 empty. And don't give me another philosophical answer about showing up. What's in it for you? Marcus appreciated the directness. 2 years ago, my wife died. Cancer. She spent 18 months in and out of hospitals, clinical trials, hospice, the whole trajectory. He kept his voice level, factual. I spent a lot of time watching people, nurses mostly, show up for her when I couldn't. Night shifts, double shifts, the ones who'd stay 10 minutes past their clock out to make sure she wasn't in pain. He met Julia's eyes. You have that same look they had, like you've seen enough suffering to know the difference between pity and compassion. Julia's expression softened, just fractionally. I'm sorry about your wife. So am I. Marcus set his glass down. But that's not why I bought you dinner. I bought you dinner because that asshole texted you something cruel enough to make you go pale, and you still sat up straight. You still gathered your things with dignity. You were going to leave without making a scene, without asking anyone for help, without letting anyone see you break. He paused. That kind of strength shouldn't go hungry. You saw all that from across the room? I pay attention. Julia folded her napkin with precise corners. Well, Mr. Hart, thank you for the reminder that some people still have manners. And for the pasta. It was excellent. She stood, gathering her purse. Marcus stood as well, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a business card, simple, cream-colored stock with his name and the Hart Foods logo, and held it between two fingers. We're hosting a nutrition symposium next Thursday. Pediatric focus, continuing education credits, lunch provided. If you're interested. He set the card on the table rather than handing it to her directly, preserving her ability to refuse without the awkwardness of physical rejection. No strings. Just thought you might find it useful. Julia looked at the card but didn't touch it. Why are you helping me? Because you asked good questions at a dinner table where you thought no one was listening. Marcus slid his hands into his pockets. I'm curious what you'd ask in a room where people should be. He turned and walked toward the exit, leaving her standing by the table with the card between them. He didn't look back, didn't wait to see if she'd take it. The gesture needed to exist without expectation, or it became something else entirely. Julia stood alone at table 12 for another 30 seconds before picking up the card and slipping it into her purse. 7 days dissolved in the rhythm of double shifts and textbook chapters. Julia worked 3 12-hour rotations at Portland General, her white LPN badge clipped to scrubs that had seen enough industrial washing to fade from navy to something closer to dusty blue. The pediatric oncology wing was short-staffed again, which meant picking up an extra overnight Thursday when she was supposed to be studying for her RN certification exam. Her apartment, a studio in a converted house near Burnside, stayed dark most mornings to save on electricity. Breakfast was black coffee and whatever protein bar was on sale at the convenience store downstairs. Lunch was usually skipped. Dinner depended on whether she had the energy to boil pasta or if peanut butter, straight from the jar, would suffice. On Wednesday afternoon, she found herself pulling Marcus Hart's business card from the zippered pocket of her purse. The symposium was tomorrow. Free continuing education credits, which she needed. Free lunch, which she needed more. The address listed a building in the Pearl District, Hart Foods headquarters, a neighborhood where Julia only ventured when picking up supplies for the hospital's charity drives. She almost didn't go. The blazer she owned, thrifted from Goodwill 2 years ago, had a small stain on the right cuff that wouldn't come out despite 3 rounds with a Tide pen. Her only professional shoes were a pair of black flats with the sole starting to separate from the leather. She looked like exactly what she was. Someone who couldn't afford to be in rooms with people who made nutrition policy. But the CE credits were worth $60 if she had to pay for them elsewhere, and if she was being honest with herself, some small part of her wanted to prove that Marcus Hart hadn't wasted his attention on someone who asked good questions by accident. Thursday morning, she called in a favor with Rosa, the day shift nurse who owed her for covering a shift during her daughter's quinceañera. Rosa agreed to swap Saturday for Thursday, which meant Julia could attend the symposium and still make rent with her weekend differential pay. Small victories, carefully orchestrated. Hart Foods occupied the top 3 floors of a renovated warehouse with exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River. Julia arrived 15 minutes early, which turned into 20 minutes of standing outside the building trying to gather the nerve to walk through the glass doors. The lobby was all polished concrete and minimalist furniture, the kind of design that announced, "We have money to spend on looking like we don't try too hard." The symposium was being held in a 3rd-floor conference room that had been set up with rows of white folding chairs facing a projection screen. Tables along the back wall offered fresh fruit, granola parfaits, and boxed smoothies, all labeled with the Heart Foods logo. Approximately 50 people had already claimed seats: pediatricians in business casual, nutritionists with canvas bags full of samples, hospital administrators in full suits. Julius chose a seat in the third row, pulled out a spiral notebook she'd bought for 39 cents during back-to-school sales, and clicked her pen twice to make sure it worked. The presenter was a woman in her 40s named Dr. Sarah Chen, a nutritional biochemist who'd consulted for Heart Foods on their toddler product line. Her slides were dense with data, charts showing preservative levels, graphs mapping nutritional density against production costs, comparative analyses of organic versus conventional ingredient sourcing. Most attendees nodded politely, took minimal notes, checked their phones when they thought no one was looking. Julia filled 4 notebook pages in the first 30 minutes. When Dr. Chen clicked to a slide showing sodium benzoate levels in fruit pouches, Julia's pen stopped mid-word. She flipped back 2 pages to a chart she'd copied earlier, cross-referenced the numbers, then raised her hand. Dr. Chen paused mid-sentence. "Yes, question in the third row?" Julia stood, her voice steadier than she felt. "Your slide shows 0.3% sodium benzoate in the mixed berry pouches for the under 3 demographic, but FDA guidelines cap preservatives in that age group at 0.1%. Is that a typo, or is there a formulation issue?" The room went quiet. Dr. Chen blinked twice, clicked back to the previous slide, then forward again. Her expression shifted from surprised to impressed. She glanced at her notes. "That's an excellent catch. The 0.3 is actually the European standard, which we're using for export products. The domestic formula is 0.08, well under the FDA threshold." Incorrect data was incorrect data, whether you were reading a medication chart or a nutritional analysis. She raised her hand 3 more times during the presentation. Once to ask about allergen cross-contamination in shared production facilities, once to point out a discrepancy in the vitamin D fortification levels between the label shown on screen and the FDA database she'd memorized for work, and once to ask whether the company had considered reformulating their oat-based products to reduce phytic acid, which inhibited iron absorption in the pediatric population they were targeting. By the end of the 90-minute session, Dr. Chen had thanked her by name twice, and a pediatrician from Oregon Health and Science University had asked if Julia was available. "You're a nurse who actually reads ingredient labels," the pediatrician countered. "That's rarer than you think." As people filtered toward the back tables for lunch, Julia hung back, unsure if the free food extended to people who weren't officially part of the healthcare establishment. She was still debating when Marcus appeared at her elbow, 2 bottles of sparkling water in hand. He offered her one without preamble. "You came." Julia accepted the water. "Free CE credits. I'd be stupid not to." "And yet half the people who RSVP'd didn't show up." Marcus gestured. The kitchen beyond was industrial but warm. Stainless steel counters softened by wooden cutting boards and ceramic bowls filled with fresh produce. 3 people in lab coats worked at different stations, barely looking up when Marcus entered. "This is where we develop new products." He moved to a counter where 6 small jars sat in a neat row, each filled with what looked like pureed vegetables in different colors. "These are prototypes for a new line targeting 18 to 24. That's better. The fat from the avocado helps nutrient absorption, and the mint is aromatic enough to create interest without adding sugar." She opened the jar, sniffed carefully. "You just identified problems they missed in about 6 minutes. I work with kids who are fighting to stay alive. You learn to pay attention." Julia wiped her finger on a paper towel. "Your team designs for parents who read ingredients. I design for kids who live with them. How much would it cost to hire you for 2 hours to review our full toddler line?" Julia nearly dropped the water bottle. "I'm not a consultant." You're a pediatric nurse with a better understanding of practical nutrition than most of the consultants I've paid $500 an hour. Marcus pulled out his phone, opened a calendar app. I'll pay you the same rate, 2 hours, next Wednesday evening if you're off shift. You review our products, tell me what's wrong, I write you a check. That's $1,000. That's market rate for expertise. Julia's first instinct was to refuse. She learned early that accepting money from people like Marcus Hart, people whose suits cost more than her monthly rent, came with invisible strings that tightened later. But $1,000 was the deposit she needed for fall semester RN classes. $1,000 was 3 months of groceries if she was careful. $1,000 was the difference between drowning and treading water. I don't have office hours. I'd have to come after my shift. We'll work around your schedule. Marcus extended his hand. Do we have a deal? Julia shook his hand, the same firm grip as the restaurant, and ignored the small voice in her head that said, this was too easy, too convenient, too much like the beginning of something she couldn't afford to want. 3 days later, Julia found herself in the children's section of Portland's Central Library, returning a stack of nursing textbooks she'd borrowed to supplement her online coursework. The library was one of her sanctuaries, climate-controlled, quiet, free. She'd spent countless afternoons here during high school, studying for SATs while her mother worked double shifts at the casino, pretending she belonged among the college prep kids whose parents drove them in SUVs with university parking stickers. She was debating whether to check out a pharmacology reference when she heard a familiar voice near the picture book carousel. Not that one, Sweet Pea. We read that one last week. Julia turned. Marcus Hart knelt beside a small girl with dark curls and purple-framed glasses, his charcoal suit jacket discarded on a nearby chair, his sleeves rolled to his elbows. The girl wore a yellow cardigan over a denim dress, white tights, and sneakers with light-up heels. She clutched a worn teddy bear under one arm while pulling books from the shelf with determined efficiency. Julia's first instinct was to leave before he saw her. The consulting session wasn't until Wednesday. She didn't need to complicate the professional boundary by running into him on his personal time. But the girl looked up at exactly the wrong moment, and their eyes met. Daddy, who's that? Marcus followed his daughter's gaze. His expression shifted through surprise into something warmer. Emma, this is Miss Julia. She's a nurse who helps kids feel better. Julia approached slowly, the same way she approached nervous patients. Hi, Emma. That's a very nice bear you have. Emma studied Julia with the solemn intensity of a 6-year-old deciding whether to trust. Then she stepped forward, tentative, and reached up to touch the fabric of Julia's cardigan. Soft cotton, lavender-colored, bought on clearance 3 seasons ago. Emma's small fingers traced the knit pattern, and then, before Julia could process what was happening, the girl leaned in and sniffed. Marcus went rigid. Emma turned to her father, her voice carrying the careful announcement of a discovered fact. She smells like Mommy. The lavender soap Mommy used. The library's ambient noise, the quiet conversations, the turning pages, the soft footsteps on carpet, seemed to compress into a vacuum. Marcus's face drained of color. His hand, resting on Emma's shoulder, began to tremble. Julia crouched to Emma's eye level, moving on pure instinct. What did your mommy smell like? Like the purple flowers in the garden? And like hugs? Julia's throat tightened. That sounds like a wonderful mommy. Emma nodded, satisfied with this assessment, and returned to browsing books. But Marcus remained frozen, staring at the space where his daughter had been standing, as if she'd just detonated a careful perimeter he'd spent 2 years building. Julia straightened, watching him struggle. His jaw worked like he was trying to speak but couldn't find air. His chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. I'm sorry. The words were barely audible, She hasn't said anything like that in 8 months. Kids don't forget. Julia kept her voice low, gentle. They just wait for safe moments to remember. Marcus walked to the window overlooking the library's small courtyard garden, hands gripping the sill like he might fall without the anchor. Julia followed, leaving enough space to give him an exit if he needed one. Emma hummed to herself among the picture books, oblivious to the earthquake she'd just triggered. Claire used lavender everything. Marcus's voice was rough, scraped raw. Soap, lotion, sachets in the closets. She had this whole routine. Sunday mornings she'd make lavender simple syrup for lemonade while Emma helped in the garden. They'd come back inside smelling like sunshine and flowers, covered in dirt, laughing about some beetle they'd found. He pressed his forehead against the glass. After she died, I kept 1 bottle of the soap. I spray Emma's pillow once a month because I don't know if I'm helping her remember or keeping her stuck in the past. You're keeping love alive. That's not stuck. That's faithful. Marcus turned to look at her, and Julia saw the full weight of his grief for the first time. Not the polished businessman from the restaurant, not the CEO offering consulting work, but a man who'd watched his wife die slowly and was now raising their daughter alone in the wreckage. Emma asked me last week if her mommy was proud of her. His voice cracked. How do I answer that? How do I tell her about Claire when she was already forgetting what her mother's voice sounded like? You tell her the truth, that her mother loved her fiercely, that love doesn't stop just because someone isn't here to say it out loud anymore. Julia paused. And you let her talk about Claire without treating it like something fragile. The more you tiptoe around the memory, the scarier it becomes to touch. Emma appeared between them, dragging a stack of 4 books that threatened to topple. Daddy, can we get all of these? Marcus wiped his eyes quickly, smoothly, and crouched to inspect her selection. That's a lot of books, Sweet Pea. But this one has the princess who fixes the bridge, and this one has the dog who learns math, and... Will you read with us? The question came from Emma, directed at Julia. Daddy does the voices, but he always makes the dragon sound like a grandpa. Marcus started to intervene. Emma, Miss Julia probably has... I'd love to. Julia sat on the bench near the children's section, and Emma immediately climbed up beside her, wedging herself between Julia and the armrest with the casual assumption of a child who'd decided this person was safe. She opened the first book, something about a bear who couldn't find his colors, and began reading in the exaggerated character voices she used for her pediatric patients. Emma giggled at the grumpy turtle. Marcus sat on Emma's other side, watching his daughter with an expression that cycled between grief and gratitude, and something Julia couldn't quite name. They read all 4 books, Emma providing running commentary on which characters were being foolish and which were making good choices. By the time they finished, Emma had tucked herself against Julia's shoulder, her breathing evening out into sleep. She doesn't do that with strangers, Marcus whispered. Julia looked down at the small girl draped across her arm, at the purple glasses slipping down her nose, at the teddy bear still clutched in a loose fist. Maybe I'm not a stranger. Maybe I'm just early. Marcus stood carefully, preparing to carry Emma without waking her. My nanny has class Thursday nights. Emergency coverage fell through for tomorrow. He paused, and Julia could see him calculating whether to ask. If you're free, Emma would... I'd appreciate the help. Just until I get home from work. I can pay your hourly rate. Julia should have said no. Should have maintained the professional boundary, kept this transactional, protected herself from the dangerous warmth of being needed by people who had the resources to replace her the moment she became inconvenient. But Emma had smelled lavender and thought of her dead mother. Marcus had trusted Julia with his grief in a library courtyard. And some part of Julia, the part that had chosen pediatric nursing specifically because she understood what it meant to lose a mother young, couldn't walk away from a 6-year-old who was learning how to remember love in the absence of its source. I am off at 4 tomorrow. Text me the address. Thursday afternoon dissolved into evening. Julia picked Emma up from after-school care at 4:20, signed the clipboard with her name now officially listed under Approved Adults, and drove the girl to Marcus's house in her 15-year-old Honda Civic with the check engine light that had been on for 3 months. Emma chattered the entire drive about her day, how Aiden had shared his crackers at snack time, how Mrs. Henderson had put a gold star on her spelling test, how the class hamster had babies and they were pink and tiny and blind. Marcus's house was a renovated Craftsman in Laurelhurst, all clean lines and warm wood tones, a front porch with rocking chairs and pots of herbs going dormant for winter. The inside was minimalist but lived in. Emma's artwork magnetized to the fridge, a stack of Heart Foods quarterly reports on the dining table, family photos carefully curated on floating shelves. Most of the photos showed Marcus, Claire, and baby Emma. A few showed just Marcus and Emma. None showed Marcus alone. Emma's room was an explosion of purple and yellow, stuffed animals organized by size on a window seat, a small bookshelf overflowing with picture books and early readers. But the most striking feature was the memory wall, a corkboard covered in photographs of Claire pregnant, glowing in a yellow sundress. Claire holding newborn Emma, exhausted and radiant. Claire and Emma in the garden, both covered in mud, laughing at something off camera. And in the center, a small wooden box with Claire's name carved on the lid. "That's Mommy's special box," Emma explained, pulling it down with reverent care. "It has her favorite scarf and her wedding invitation and the bracelet Daddy gave her when I was born." Julia sat on the edge of Emma's bed. "Your mommy was very beautiful. Daddy says I have her smile." Emma opened the box, touching each item like a museum curator. "And her brave heart." "I think he's right." They spent the next hour doing homework, simple addition problems that Emma solved with careful pencil strokes, reading comprehension questions about a story involving a clever fox. Julia made dinner from the ingredients Marcus had left with detailed instructions. Grilled cheese with tomato soup, apple slices with peanut butter, carrot sticks Emma was required to eat at least 3 of before dessert. They ate at the kitchen table, Emma kicking her feet against the chair legs and explaining the complex social dynamics of first grade with the seriousness of a war correspondent. At 7:30, Emma's energy flagged. Julia ran a bath, helped Emma into pajamas covered in stars and moons, and sat on the bathroom floor while Emma brushed her teeth with meticulous attention to each quadrant. They were reading the 2nd chapter of a fairy tale book when Emma's forehead began to feel warm under Julia's hand. "Sweet pea, do you feel okay?" "My head hurts a little." Emma's voice had gone small, uncertain. "And my tummy feels funny." Julia found the thermometer in the medicine cabinet Marcus had told her about. 101.2. Not dangerous, but uncomfortable. She texted Marcus. "Emma has a low fever, 101.2. She's okay, but might need you sooner." The response came back immediately. "Stuck in meeting until 8. Can you stay?" Julia gave Emma children's acetaminophen from the labeled bottle in the cabinet, made her drink half a glass of water, and settled her on the living room couch under a soft blanket. Emma's face was flushed, her purple glasses slightly crooked, her teddy bear tucked under her chin. "Will you stay until Daddy comes home?" I'm not going anywhere. Emma closed her eyes, restless, shifting every few minutes like she couldn't find a comfortable position. Julia fetched a cool washcloth, folded it, and placed it gently on Emma's forehead. The girl let out a small sigh of relief. Mommy used to do this. Emma's eyes remained closed. When I was sick, she'd put cold cloths on my head and sing songs until I fell asleep. Julia's chest constricted. What songs did she sing? Emma's face scrunched in concentration. There was one about the moon. It was silly. The moon wears socks when it's cold at night. She trailed off, the fever making her foggy. I don't remember the rest. Can you teach me? If you remember some of it? Emma hummed a few bars of melody, soft and wandering, then whispered fragments of lyrics between fevered breaths. The moon wears socks when it's cold at night, and stars wear scarves so soft and white. She hummed again. Something about clouds having mittens, and the sun sleeping in a hat. Julia listened carefully, committing the melody and the nonsense words to memory. When Emma's humming faded into silence, Julia began singing it back, improvising the missing pieces with gentle rhymes about celestial sleepwear. The moon's socks were purple striped. The stars' scarves were made of light. The clouds wore fuzzy mittens to keep their rain warm at night. Emma's breathing slowed, deepened. Julia kept singing, her voice barely above a whisper, one hand resting on the girl's shoulder. She didn't hear the front door open, didn't hear Marcus's keys hit the table in the entryway, or his briefcase drop to the floor. She only realized he was there when she glanced up between verses and saw him standing in the archway to the living room, frozen, like someone had paused him mid-step. His face had gone absolutely white. His hand gripped the doorframe so hard, his knuckles looked bloodless. And his eyes were streaming with silent tears that he didn't bother to wipe away. Julia stopped singing. Emma slept on, the fever-induced rest finally claiming her. Marcus didn't move. Couldn't seem to move. His chest rose and fell with shallow, controlled breaths, the kind of breathing someone did when they were trying not to break apart in public. Julia stood slowly, careful not to disturb Emma, and walked to the kitchen. She poured a glass of water from the filtered pitcher in the fridge and brought it to Marcus, who still hadn't moved from the doorway. Here. She pressed the glass into his hand. He took it automatically, but didn't drink. That song. His voice was wrecked, barely functional. Where did you learn that song? Emma taught me. She remembered some of it, and I filled in the pieces she couldn't. Marcus set the glass on the hallway table before he dropped it. He walked to the couch where Emma slept, knelt beside her, and rested his forehead against the armrest, his shoulders shaking. Julia stayed in the kitchen doorway, giving him space to fall apart in whatever privacy she could offer. When Marcus finally spoke again, his voice came muffled against the couch fabric. Claire made up that song when Emma was a baby. She'd sing it every night during the bedtime routine. When she got too sick to carry Emma upstairs, she'd sing it from the hospital bed over FaceTime. He lifted his head, eyes red-rimmed. Emma sang it to her mother the last night Claire was conscious. In hospice. She was 4 years old, and she held her mother's hand and sang about the moon wearing socks because she thought it would make her mommy better. Julia's own eyes burned. Emma needed to share it. She needed someone to hear her mother's love. I haven't heard that song in 2 years. I thought. Marcus stood, unsteady. I thought Emma had forgotten. I thought I was the only one still carrying it. Children don't forget love. They just need permission to remember it out loud. Marcus looked at her with something beyond gratitude, something rawer and more complicated. You're not trying to replace her. No. Julia met his gaze. I'm trying to honor her. The front door opened again, and both of them startled. A woman in her mid-60s stepped inside. Chanel suit in navy wool, pearl earrings, an expression of polite concern that shifted to sharp suspicion the moment she saw Julia. Marcus, Mrs. Patel called me when she couldn't reach you. She said Emma was ill. The woman's gaze moved from Marcus to Julia to sleeping Emma and back. I came as soon as I could. Marcus straightened, wiping his face quickly. Catherine, Emma's fine, just a low fever. This is Julia Morgan. She's the nurse. Catherine Morrison moved into the living room like she owned it, which, given that this had been her daughter's house first, she probably felt she did. Mrs. Patel mentioned you'd been spending time with my granddaughter. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Julia recognized the look in Catherine's eyes, the same assessment she'd seen from wealthy parents in the hospital who couldn't quite believe their child's nurse came from a zip code with a food desert. I'm helping out when Mrs. Patel has class. Julia kept her voice neutral, professional. Emma had a fever, so I stayed until Marcus could get home. How convenient. Catherine set her purse on the entryway table with decisive precision. A young woman in my daughter's home, singing my daughter's songs to my granddaughter. Catherine. Marcus's voice carried a warning. We need to talk. Privately. Marcus looked at Julia, apology written across his face. Julia shook her head slightly, don't, and moved to gather her things. Emma's fever broke about 20 minutes ago. I gave her acetaminophen at 7:45. She can have another dose at 11:45 if it spikes again. She drank water but didn't eat much dinner. The grilled cheese is wrapped in the fridge if she wakes up hungry. Julia pulled on her cardigan, professional mask firmly in place. I'll see myself out. Julia, wait! But she was already at the door, already escaping before she had to hear whatever Catherine was about to say in the next room. She heard it anyway, Catherine's voice carrying through the old house's thin walls as Julia descended the porch steps. 2 years, Marcus. I understand loneliness, but this is reckless. Julia unlocked her car, slid into the driver's seat, and allowed herself exactly 30 seconds of sitting in Marcus Hart's driveway with her hands shaking on the steering wheel. Then she started the engine and drove home to her studio apartment, where the rent was due in 6 days, and she still needed another $140 to cover it. She found the note wedged under her apartment door at 11 p.m., after a shower failed to wash away the feeling of Catherine Morrison's eyes cataloging every cheap detail of her existence. Plain cream cardstock, Marcus's handwriting in black ink. Emma's fever broke. She asked for you twice. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for healing. M. Julia taped it to her bathroom mirror and fell asleep on her futon couch with her phone alarm set for her 6 a.m. shift. Marcus called at 7 the next morning while Julia was buttoning her scrubs for the early shift. She almost sent it to voicemail. Her phone bill was overdue, and she couldn't afford the overage charges from a long conversation. But something made her answer. Catherine owes you an apology. No preamble, no small talk. Marcus's voice carried the flat exhaustion of someone who'd been up most of the night. I told her what you did for Emma, how you learned the song from her, how you stayed when she was sick. A long pause. She has reasons for being protective. They're not good reasons, but they exist. Julia switched the phone to speaker while she braided her hair. You don't owe me an explanation. I owe you honesty. The sound of coffee being poured, a mug set down on granite. Emma is all Catherine has left of Claire. She's terrified of losing her, terrified of Emma forgetting her mother, terrified that anyone new in our lives is a threat to Claire's memory. It makes her cruel when she should be grateful. Mr. Hart, Marcus, please. Marcus, I'm not competing with a ghost, and I won't let anyone, including you, treat me like I'm trying to. Julia zipped her backpack, checked that her stethoscope was inside. I came to help with Emma because you asked, and because she needed it. That's all this is. Is it? The question hung between them, too heavy for a Friday morning phone call. Julia grabbed her keys, locked her apartment door, descended the stairs to where her car waited with its persistent check engine light. I have to get to work. My consulting session is still Wednesday at 6 if you want it. If not, that's fine too. Julia, Marcus's voice gentled. Can we start over? Slowly? I'm not going anywhere. But I'm not chasing either. She ended the call before he could respond, drove to Portland General through morning traffic, and spent the next 12 hours managing medication schedules for children with leukemia, neuroblastoma, and Wilms tumor. She held the hand of a 7-year-old boy while he cried through a spinal tap. She taught a new mother how to flush a PICC line without contaminating the sterile field. She charted vitals and administered chemotherapy and cleaned up vomit with the same steady competence that had gotten her through nursing school while working 3 part-time jobs. During her lunch break, 20 minutes in the break room with a peanut butter sandwich and an apple, she pulled out Marcus's business card and stared at the consulting session penciled in her planner. $1,000. 2 hours of work. The ethical part of her brain insisted it was too much money for too little effort, that accepting it made her beholden to him, that mixing the professional with the increasingly complicated personal was a recipe for disaster. The practical part of her brain calculated that $1,000 meant she could register for fall RN classes without taking out another student loan, could replace the car battery that was threatening to die, could stop choosing between groceries and electricity. She kept the appointment. Wednesday evening arrived with October rain and an early sunset that turned Portland streets into rivers of reflected neon. Julia left her shift at 4, drove to the Pearl District, and found parking 3 blocks from Hart Foods headquarters because the garage charged $15 and she refused to pay it. She walked through the rain with her canvas backpack held over her head, arrived in the lobby dripping and self-conscious, and took the elevator to the 3rd floor where Marcus's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Diane, directed her to the test kitchen. Marcus was already there, sleeves rolled up, 6 product prototypes arranged on the counter alongside nutritional analyses printed on Hart Foods letterhead. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression eased. You came. You're paying me $1,000. I'd be stupid not to. He handed her a towel for her hair without commenting on the rain. Julia dried off, set her backpack on a stool, and approached the counter with the clinical assessment she used for triaging patients in the ER. The next 90 minutes dissolved into a focused dissection of Hart Foods' toddler product line. Julia examined each prototype with the same attention she gave to medication interactions, cross-referencing nutritional content against developmental feeding guidelines she'd memorized for her certification exam. The sweet potato puffs had too much added sugar for the target age range. The grain bars were too dense for 18-month molars. The smoothie pouches didn't account for children with oral motor delays who needed thicker textures. She caught a labeling error that would have triggered an FDA warning letter. The allergen information listed may contain traces of tree nuts, but the ingredient list included almond flour, which wasn't a trace, it was a primary component. Marcus made a note to pull the prototype immediately. Your quality control team missed this? My quality control team has PhDs in food science. They're excellent at chemistry and terrible at reading the way an actual parent would read. Marcus leaned against the counter, watching her work. You read like someone who knows what happens when a label is wrong. I've seen a kid go into anaphylactic shock because a cafeteria worker didn't check the ingredients in a granola bar. His mom sued the school district, the food manufacturer, and everyone in between. He lived, but he had brain damage from the oxygen deprivation. Julia set down the smoothie pouch. So yes, I read labels like they matter. By the time they finished, Julia had filled 8 pages in her notebook with observations, reformulation suggestions, and competitive product comparisons. Marcus photographed every page with his phone, then pulled out his checkbook and wrote her a check for $1,000 in handwriting that was surprisingly neat for a man who spent most of his time typing. Julia stared at the check like it might evaporate. This is too much. This is exactly what I'd pay any consultant with your level of insight. You just saved us from a potential recall and 3 reformulations that would have failed in market testing. If anything, I'm underpaying you. She folded the check carefully and tucked it into her wallet next to the $22 in cash that was supposed to last until Friday's paycheck. Marcus walked her to the elevator, hands in his pockets, the careful distance of someone trying not to crowd. Emma asks about you every day. When's Miss Julia coming back? Does Miss Julia like mac and cheese? Would Miss Julia want to see my spelling test? He pressed the elevator call button. Mrs. Patel's class schedule is permanent through December. If you're willing, I'd like to hire you for Tuesdays and Thursdays. Same rate as before. You'd be helping me and Emma likes you. That's rare. Julia stepped into the elevator when it arrived, held the door with one hand. I'm off Tuesdays at 3 and Thursdays at 4. Text me if you need me. She released the door and watched Marcus disappear as the elevator descended, her reflection in the brushed steel showing a woman who looked tired and wary, and maybe, possibly, like someone who was starting to believe she deserved to be paid what she was worth. The check cleared Friday morning. Julia deposited it via mobile app at 6 a.m., watched her account balance climb from $273 to $1,273, and cried in her car in the Portland General parking lot for 3 minutes before her shift started. Tuesday afternoon, she picked Emma up from after-school care in the same worn Honda Civic, signed the same clipboard, and drove to the Laurelhurst house, where Emma had already started treating her like a fixture. The girl talked non-stop about a class field trip to the pumpkin patch, about how she'd found the biggest pumpkin in the whole field, but it was too heavy to carry, so Mrs. Henderson had to help. She described the pumpkin's shape and color, and the way its stem was crooked like a witch's finger. They did homework at the kitchen table, subtraction problems that required borrowing from the tens place, reading comprehension about a story involving a clever raccoon. Julia made dinner from ingredients Marcus had left with detailed instructions. Baked chicken tenders with honey mustard, steamed broccoli that Emma was required to eat at least 4 pieces of, sweet potato fries cut thin and crispy. Emma provided running commentary on the complex social dynamics of first grade. Who shared crayons, who didn't share crayons, who got a time out for pushing during recess. After dinner, they curled up on the living room couch with a fairy tale book, Emma wedged against Julia's side with her teddy bear and her purple glasses slightly askew. They read 2 chapters about a princess who built a bridge across a river so her village could trade with a neighboring kingdom. Emma asked approximately 40 questions about engineering and trade routes and whether the princess ever got to wear a pretty dress or if she just wore work clothes all the time. I think she probably wore both. Work clothes when she was building, pretty dresses for special occasions. Emma considered this. Miss Julia, do you think Mommy would like you? The question arrived without warning, delivered in the casual tone of a child who didn't understand she'd just lobbed a grenade into the room. Julia set the book down carefully. I hope so, but I think your mommy would care more about whether you feel safe with me. I do feel safe. Emma traced the pattern on her teddy bear's worn fur. You don't try to make me forget Mommy. Daddy's other friend Sarah used to say I should make new memories, but that felt like she wanted me to erase the old ones. Julia's chest tightened. She hadn't known there was a Sarah, hadn't known Marcus had attempted this before with someone who'd gotten it wrong. New memories don't replace old ones, Sweet Pea. They're just more rooms in the same house. You can have a room for Mommy and a room for now, and they both get to exist. Emma looked up at her with those serious eyes behind purple frames. Do you have a mommy room? I do. My mom died when I was 16. Breast cancer. Does it still hurt? Sometimes. But mostly it just feels like she's someone I carry with me. Like how you carry your teddy bear. Emma hugged the bear tighter. Daddy says Mommy is in heaven watching me. Do you think she saw me find the big pumpkin? I think if love can reach anywhere, it can reach from heaven to a pumpkin patch. Marcus arrived home at 7:30, loosening his tie as he walked through the door. Emma launched herself at him with the full force of 6-year-old enthusiasm, detailing the pumpkin adventure with expansive hand gestures. He listened with complete attention, asking follow-up questions about the pumpkin's size and whether the stem really looked like a witch's finger. Julia gathered her things while they talked, gave Emma a quick hug, and headed for the door. Marcus followed her to the porch. Thank you for... He gestured vaguely toward the house. All of it. She's easy to care about. So are you. Julia felt the words land somewhere in her chest, dangerous and warm. She descended the porch steps without responding, drove home to her studio apartment, and lay awake until midnight, trying not to think about Marcus Hart's eyes when he looked at her like she was someone worth caring about. Thursday's routine mirrored Tuesday's. After-school pickup, homework, dinner, bedtime stories. But this time when Marcus came home, he brought takeout from a Thai restaurant Emma loved and insisted Julia stay to eat. They sat at the kitchen table while Emma demonstrated her newfound ability to use chopsticks, dropping rice grains everywhere and giggling when Marcus pretended to be scandalized by the mess. Julia watched them together and saw the careful choreography of a father who'd learned to be both parents. Marcus cut Emma's spring rolls into smaller pieces without being asked. Emma wiped her own face when she spilled sauce, but accepted help when her milk glass tipped precariously. They had a language of small gestures, a raised eyebrow from Marcus that meant settle down, a specific hum from Emma that meant she was tired and needed help, without having to say it out loud. After Emma went to bed, Marcus made coffee and they sat on the back porch while October rain drummed on the overhang. The yard was dark, the only light coming from the kitchen window behind them. Catherine hired a private investigator to background check you. Marcus delivered this information with the flat affect of someone reporting unpleasant weather. She told me yesterday. I'm sorry. Julia set her coffee mug on the porch railing. What did they find? Student loans, income below the poverty line, a younger brother at Portland Community College who you're helping support. No criminal record, no red flags, no evidence of anything except someone working 3 times as hard as they should have to. Marcus turned to look at her. She's starting to realize she was wrong about you. Too proud to admit it yet, but the doubt is there. I don't need her approval. No, but Emma does need her grandmother. And it would be easier if Catherine weren't actively trying to sabotage anything good that happens in our lives. He paused. She lost her daughter. She's terrified of losing Emma, too. It makes her mean when she should be grateful. You've said that before. It's still true. Marcus picked up his coffee, set it back down without drinking. Claire was an only child. Catherine's husband died 10 years ago. Emma is literally all she has left of her family. She built this whole fortress around the memory of Claire, around Emma's connection to Claire. And now I'm watching that fortress crack because you keep showing up and being exactly what we need. Julia stood, walked to the porch steps, looked out at the rain-soaked garden where Claire had once grown lavender with her daughter. I'm not trying to replace your wife. I know. Marcus joined her at the railing. That's why it works. They stood in the dark while rain fell and something unspoken stretched between them, too fragile to name, too present to ignore. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Friday morning while Julia was 3 hours into a night shift monitoring a 10-year-old with post-surgical complications. Marcus's name on her phone screen sent immediate adrenaline through her system. Emma's sick. His voice was stretched thin. High fever, she's asking for you. Mrs. Patel is out of town for a family emergency, and I have a video conference with a distributor in Singapore in 4 hours that I can't reschedule. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Julia found coverage for the rest of her shift, drove to Laurelhurst in violation of every traffic law she could safely break, and arrived to find Marcus at the door in sweatpants and a faded Heart Foods t-shirt, hair disheveled, eyes showing the whites all the way around. Emma was on the living room couch, wrapped in 3 blankets, purple glasses discarded on the coffee table. Her face was flushed, her breathing shallow, and when Julia pressed a hand to her forehead, the heat was immediate and alarming. How high? 103.4. I gave her acetaminophen an hour ago. Marcus hovered like he wanted to help but didn't know how. She threw up twice, won't drink water, keeps asking for you. Julia knelt beside the couch. Emma, sweet pea, can you hear me? Emma's eyes fluttered open, glassy with fever. Miss Julia, I don't feel good. I know, baby. I'm going to help you feel better, okay? Julia looked up at Marcus. Go take your conference call. I've got this. Julia, Marcus, go. She'll be fine. He hesitated, then nodded and disappeared into his home office. Julia heard the door close, the muffled sound of him joining a video call, professional voice snapping into place despite the crisis happening in his living room. Julia worked with the efficiency of someone who'd managed pediatric emergencies in understaffed ERs. She checked Emma's temperature again, noted it had dropped to 102.8. The acetaminophen was working, but slowly. She coaxed Emma into drinking small sips of water, repositioned her to elevate her head, applied cool compresses to her forehead and wrists. Emma dozed fitfully, waking every few minutes to ask where her daddy was, whether Miss Julia was staying, if she was going to have to go to the hospital like Mommy did. You're not going to the hospital. This is just a regular fever. Your body is fighting off something and it's making you uncomfortable, but you're going to be okay. Julia stroked Emma's hair back from her damp forehead. Your daddy is working right now, but he's just down the hall. He'll come check on you as soon as he's done. Will you stay? I'm not going anywhere. Emma fell into deeper sleep around 3:30 a.m., her breathing evening out, the flush in her cheeks fading to something less alarming. Julia stayed on the floor beside the couch, monitoring her breathing, adjusting blankets, checking temperature every 20 minutes. She found herself humming without thinking about it. The moon song, the one Emma had taught her, the one that belonged to Claire. The home office door opened at 4 a.m. Marcus emerged looking wrecked, hair standing in multiple directions, eyes red from screen glare and stress, still wearing the sweatpants but having thrown on a button-down shirt for the video call. He took in the scene, Emma sleeping peacefully, Julia on the floor beside her, cool cloths and water glasses arranged on the coffee table like a field hospital. "How is she?" "Fever broke 20 minutes ago, down to 99.6. She's sleeping normally now." Julia stood, stretched muscles that had gone stiff from sitting on hardwood. "Probably just a viral thing. If the fever comes back or if she develops other symptoms, call her pediatrician in the morning. But I think she's past the worst of it." Marcus sank into the armchair across from the couch, dropped his head into his hands. "I couldn't do this without you." "Yes, you could. You were doing it before I showed up." "No." He looked up at her. "I was surviving. There's a difference." Julia moved to the kitchen, started cleaning up the medicine bottles and thermometer, gave Marcus space to decompress. She heard him get up, heard his footsteps approach, felt him stop in the kitchen doorway. "It's 4 a.m. You just worked a 12-hour shift and then came here and managed Emma's fever for 2 more hours." His voice carried something beyond gratitude. "Let me make you breakfast at least. Or coffee, something." "I should go. Let you sleep." "Please stay." The please landed differently than it should have, weighted with too much history and too much present need. Julia turned to find Marcus leaning against the doorframe, exhausted and vulnerable, and looking at her like she was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. "Just until Emma wakes up. To make sure she's really okay." Marcus made coffee in a French press, the good kind that came from a local roaster and smelled like it cost more per pound than Julia's weekly grocery budget. They sat at the kitchen table while the sky outside shifted from black to deep blue to the pale gray of pre-dawn. Neither of them spoke much. There wasn't need for it. The silence held its own conversation. Emma woke at 6:30, groggy but improved, asking for toast and apple juice. Marcus made her breakfast while Julia changed out the fever-damp sheets on the couch for fresh ones, helped Emma into clean pajamas, settled her with a stack of picture books and a glass of watered-down juice. "You're really good at this." Marcus stood beside Julia in the hallway, watching Emma through the doorway. "The nursing thing, but also the being here thing. I like her. She's easy to care about." "So are you." It was the second time he'd said it, and this time Julia didn't deflect. She met his eyes and saw the same dangerous warmth she felt building in her own chest, the same recognition that this had stopped being about childcare or consulting or professional boundaries weeks ago. "I should go." She meant it as self-preservation, but it came out like regret. "I know." Marcus walked her to the door, held it open while she gathered her backpack and keys. "Julia?" She turned. "Thank you. For all of it. For showing up." Julia nodded and left before she could say something that would make this more complicated than it already was. She drove home through Friday morning traffic, fell into bed without showering, and slept until her phone alarm dragged her back to consciousness at 2 p.m. for the evening shift. The envelope arrived at Portland General 4 days later, delivered by courier to the nurses' station with Julia's name typed on the front. Inside was an invitation on heavy cream cardstock, embossed lettering that probably cost more to print than Julia made in a day. "Catherine Morrison requests the pleasure of your company for dinner. Sunday, October 29th, 6 p.m. An address in the West Hills, the kind of neighborhood where houses had names instead of numbers. Rosa leaned over Julia's shoulder. Fancy. Who's Catherine Morrison? Marcus Hart's mother-in-law. The hot CEO with the cute kid? Damn, girl, you're moving up in the world. Julia reread the invitation, searching for the catch. A handwritten note at the bottom, fountain pen in precise cursive. I owe you a conversation. Please come. C.M. She almost didn't go. Spent Saturday night trying on the 4 outfits she owned that could pass for dinner appropriate, rejecting all of them for various flaws, too casual, too cheap, too obviously thrifted. She settled on black pants and a dove gray sweater that didn't have any visible stains, paired with the same black flats whose sole was still threatening to detach. The Morrison House, perched on a hillside with views of downtown Portland. A Tudor revival with manicured gardens and a circular driveway where Julia's Honda looked like it had wandered in from a junkyard. She sat in the car for 5 minutes, debating whether to leave, before forcing herself to walk to the front door and ring the bell. Catherine answered in tailored slacks and a cashmere cardigan, pearls at her throat, silver hair styled in the kind of cut that required weekly salon appointments. She looked at Julia with an expression that was equal parts assessment and resignation. Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure you would. The house interior matched the exterior. Old money elegance, antique furniture that whispered family heirlooms, artwork that was probably original. Catherine led Julia through a formal living room to a smaller sitting room with French doors overlooking the garden. Tea service was already arranged on a low table. Actual china, cloth napkins, tiny sandwiches arranged on a tiered stand. Julia sat on the edge of an upholstered chair and accepted a teacup she was terrified of breaking. Catherine poured her own tea, added lemon with silver tongs, and set the cup down untouched. I had you investigated. Marcus told you? He mentioned it. I expected to find something. A criminal record, financial fraud, evidence that you were targeting my son-in-law for his money. Catherine's mouth tightened. Instead, I found a young woman working herself to exhaustion to support her brother's education while paying off her own student loans. Someone who picks up extra shifts and donates blood for the $20 compensation and buys day-old bread from the bakery discount rack. Julia set her teacup down before her shaking hands betrayed her. Did you invite me here to document my poverty? I invited you here to apologize. Catherine finally met Julia's eyes. I was cruel to you in Marcus's home. I accused you of... I made assumptions based on fear, not evidence. I'm sorry. The apology landed like something foreign, unexpected. Julia had prepared for another confrontation, another attempt to buy her off or scare her away. She hadn't prepared for genuine contrition. Why the change of heart? Because I asked my granddaughter what she liked about you, and she said... Catherine's voice wavered. She said you let her talk about her mother without making sad faces. That you help her remember instead of trying to make her forget. That you smell like lavender and it makes her feel safe. She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, pressed it to her eyes. My daughter used lavender everything. When Emma said that, I realized you're not trying to erase Claire. You're helping Emma hold on to her. Julia's throat tightened. Emma is easy to love. And I lost my mother young. I know what it's like to need permission to remember. Catherine stood, walked to a built-in bookshelf, and pulled down a leather photo album. She settled back into her chair and opened it to the first page. Claire as a baby, pink-faced and furious in a christening gown. She turned pages slowly, narrating Claire's life in photographs. Claire's first day of school. Claire at a piano recital. Claire graduating from Reed College. Claire and Marcus's wedding. Claire glowing in ivory silk with wildflowers in her hair. She was diagnosed 3 months after Emma was born. Ovarian cancer, stage 3. She fought for 18 months. Surgery, chemotherapy, radiation, experimental trials. Nothing worked. Catherine's hands trembled as she turned to the last page. Claire in hospice, skeletal and pale, holding Emma in her lap while Marcus sat beside them. This was taken the night before she died. Emma sang to her, that ridiculous song about the moon wearing socks. Marcus told me. Did he tell you I haven't been able to listen to it since? That I change the subject every time Emma mentions it? That I've been so desperate to preserve Claire's memory that I've made it toxic for my granddaughter to express it? Catherine closed the album. You gave Emma permission to share something I made painful. That's what a mother does. I'm not Emma's mother. No, but you're someone she trusts to keep her mother's memory alive. That's more valuable than you know. Catherine stood, walked to the French doors, looked out at the garden where dusk was settling. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay. Are you in love with Marcus? Julia's breath caught. She hadn't let herself think about it in those terms, hadn't allowed the feelings developing in her chest to crystallize into anything with a name. But sitting in Catherine Morrison's sitting room with Claire's photograph album between them, the truth was unavoidable. I don't know, maybe. I'm trying not to be. Why? Because he's still in love with his wife. Because Emma needs stability, not her father's girlfriend cycling through like temporary furniture. Because I'm a broke LPN living paycheck to paycheck, and Marcus is a CEO with a company and a house and a life I don't fit into. Julia stood as well, needing the movement. Because every time I let myself care about something good, it gets taken away. Catherine turned from the window, and her expression had softened into something almost maternal. Claire would have liked you. She had no patience for people who performed helplessness. She respected competence and honesty, and women who didn't apologize for taking up space. She moved to a sideboard, opened a drawer, pulled out a checkbook. I'm going to offer you money, and I need you to not be offended. Julia's defenses slammed back into place. I don't want $50,000 for your education. Finish your RN, get your BSN, specialize in pediatric oncology if that's what you want. Catherine wrote the check with swift strokes. No strings, no expectations. This is an investment in someone my granddaughter loves and someone who might, if Marcus stops being an idiot about his own feelings, become part of this family. She held out the check. Julia stared at it like it might bite. I can't take that. Why not? Because I don't want your money, Mrs. Morrison. I want your granddaughter to feel safe loving more than one person. I want Marcus to stop punishing himself for surviving his wife's death. And I want you to stop seeing me as a threat to Claire's memory. Julia pushed the check back across the table. I don't need to be bought. I just need to be trusted. Catherine set the check down, and something in her posture shifted, respect replacing suspicion. You really don't want it? I really don't. Then what do you want? Julia considered the question, thought about Emma's purple glasses and Marcus's careful distance, and the way Catherine's voice had broken when she talked about Claire's hospice photograph. I want Emma to remember her mother without feeling guilty for being happy. I want Marcus to stop treating every moment of peace like it's betraying Claire. And I want you to stop seeing love as a zero-sum game, where caring about me means forgetting your daughter. Catherine's eyes filled. She sat back down, pulled out the handkerchief again, and wept quietly into the expensive fabric. Julia stayed where she was, giving her space, until Catherine's breathing steadied. Claire had an annual tradition for Emma's birthday. She called it Mommy Memory Day. We'd plant flowers in the garden, make Claire's favorite cookies, write letters to heaven, and release them on balloons. Catherine twisted the handkerchief in her hands. I've tried to continue it, but Emma resists every year. I think she associates it with grief instead of love, with losing her mother instead of celebrating her. Maybe she needs someone who's not carrying the same grief to help her see it differently. Would you? Catherine looked up with something like hope. Help me plan it? Emma's birthday's in 3 weeks. If you could make it feel less like a funeral and more like a celebration, I'll help. They spent the next 2 hours planning Emma's 7th birthday, discussing flower choices and cookie recipes, and whether releasing balloons was environmentally responsible or if they should plant a tree instead. Catherine showed Julia Claire's old recipe cards, her gardening journal, the specific shade of purple she'd favored for everything from nail polish to kitchen towels. Julia learned that Claire had been pre-med before switching to environmental policy, that she'd met Marcus at a farmer's market where he was selling homemade baby food from a card table, that their wedding song was La Vie en Rose, and they'd danced to it in their living room every anniversary until she got too weak to stand. When Julia finally left the Morrison house at 10 p.m., she carried a folder full of notes and a much lighter heart than she'd brought. Catherine walked her to the door, hesitated, then pulled her into a brief, stiff hug. Thank you for everything. For Emma, for Marcus, for not letting me destroy something good because I was afraid. Julia drove home with her hands steady on the wheel and tears running down her face that had nothing to do with sadness. The envelope from Seattle University arrived on a Tuesday morning in late October, forwarded from Portland General's HR department because Julia had listed the hospital as her permanent address. She held it for 3 full minutes before opening it, standing in the nurse's break room while Rosa made pointed comments about watching paint dry being more interesting than watching Julia stare at mail. The letter was printed on heavy paper with the university seal embossed at the top. Julia's eyes caught fragments. Pleased to inform you. Full scholarship. RN to BSN accelerated program. Pediatric oncology specialization track. 14 months beginning January 8th. Her hands shook. This was everything. The escape route from paycheck to paycheck survival. The professional credentials that would triple her earning potential, the specialization in the field where she'd watched too many children die because the healthcare system didn't have enough nurses who understood both medicine and compassion. Rosa grabbed the letter, scanned it, and screamed loud enough that 2 doctors came running from the supply closet thinking there was a code blue. Full ride to Seattle! Girl, you're getting out. Julia took the letter back, reread it to make sure the words hadn't changed. January 8th, 10 weeks away. The program was residential, mandatory campus housing for the accelerated track, clinical rotations at Seattle Children's Hospital, evening seminars 3 nights a week. There was a line at the bottom about the program's intensity, requiring full-time commitment, discouraging outside employment or long-distance commuting. She should have felt elated, should have celebrated the culmination of 3 years of night shift studying and practice exams and working herself to exhaustion. Instead, her chest felt like someone had reached in and squeezed. 10 weeks until she left Portland, left her studio apartment and her Friday morning coffee routine and the pediatric oncology patients she'd been following for months. Left Tuesday and Thursday afternoons with Emma, left watching Marcus discover that letting people in didn't mean betraying the dead. She waited 3 days before telling him. picked Emma up from after-school care on Thursday, helped with homework, made dinner, chicken stir-fry with vegetables Emma actually ate without complaint. Marcus came home at 7, carrying takeout he'd forgotten they didn't need, and they ended up eating both meals while Emma provided detailed analysis of a classroom debate about whether dinosaurs could have been purple. After Emma went to bed, Julia and Marcus sat on the back porch with coffee going cold in their mugs. November rain drummed steady and relentless, the kind of Pacific Northwest precipitation that felt less like weather and more like ambiance. I got into the RN program, Seattle University, full scholarship. Julia kept her eyes on the dark garden. Starts in January. 14 months, accelerated track, pediatric oncology specialization. Marcus set his coffee down carefully. Julia, that's incredible. It's 3 hours away. The program requires campus housing. I'd be gone weekdays, maybe weekends too, depending on clinical rotations. You have to go. She turned to look at him. Just like that? You have to go? Yes. His voice was firm, certain. This is everything you've worked for. You can't pass this up because of... He gestured between them. Whatever this is. What if I don't want to pass it up? What if I want to stay and figure out what this is? The words came out sharper than she intended. Then you'd be making a massive mistake. Marcus stood, paced to the porch railing. I watched Claire sacrifice her career ambitions because we got pregnant before she finished her master's program. She said it was fine, said being a mother was enough. But I saw the regret in her eyes every time one of her classmates published research or got a faculty position. He turned back to Julia. I won't watch you make the same choice. I won't be the reason you give up your future. You don't get to decide what I sacrifice, and you don't get to sabotage yourself because you feel guilty about leaving. His jaw tightened. Everyone I loved leaves. Claire didn't choose it, but you'd be choosing to stay and resent me later. I won't do that to you or to me. Julia stood as well, anger rising to meet his. Or maybe I'd be choosing us. Did you consider that possibility? That I might want to build something here instead of running away to Seattle? It's not running away. It's running toward. Marcus's voice dropped. Toward becoming the nurse you're meant to be. Toward financial stability. Toward a career that matters. You can't do that from my kitchen table helping Emma with spelling homework. Don't diminish what we've built here. Julia's hands clenched. Emma needs consistency, not another person who leaves. What I need is for you to stop making decisions based on what other people need and start making them based on what you deserve. Marcus closed the distance between them, but didn't touch her. You deserve this scholarship, this career, this future, and I will not be the man who stood in your way. They stood in the rain-soaked darkness, neither willing to concede, until Julia grabbed her backpack and keys and left without saying goodbye. She cried in her car for 20 minutes before driving home. Emma heard about the scholarship from Marcus the next day and took it about as well as a 6-year-old could take news about another adult leaving, which is to say, she didn't take it at all. Julia arrived for Tuesday pickup to find Emma sitting outside the after-school care building with her backpack and teddy bear, refusing to get in any car, refusing to speak, tears streaming down her face behind purple glasses. The care supervisor looked relieved when Julia appeared. She's been like this for 20 minutes. Won't tell us what's wrong, just keep saying she wants to wait for Miss Julia. Julia knelt on the wet sidewalk. Emma, sweet pea, what's going on? You're going away, like Mommy went away. Emma's voice broke on the words. Daddy said you're going to school far away, and you won't be here anymore. I'm going to school in Seattle. That's 3 hours away, not... Emma, I'm not dying. Your mommy didn't choose to leave. She got sick, and the sickness took her away. But I'm choosing to go learn things so I can help more kids, and then I'm choosing to come back. Mommy went to the hospital and didn't come back. Emma wiped her nose on her sleeve. You're going away, and you won't come back either. Julia's heart fractured. She pulled Emma into a hug, felt the small body shake with sobs that were too big for someone so young. I promise I'll come back. I promise I'll call you every night. I promise you can visit me in Seattle. I promise, like pinky promise. Emma pulled back, held out her pinky finger. Julia linked her own pinky with Emma's, and they sat on the wet sidewalk, making the kind of promise that Julia knew could break her if she failed to keep it. That night, after Emma fell asleep mid-story with her head on Julia's lap, Marcus found Julia in the kitchen cleaning up dinner dishes. Thank you for handling that. I didn't know how to explain it to her without making her relive her mother's death. Julia scrubbed a pot with more force than necessary. You need to get Emma into therapy. Real therapy, not just the grief counseling you did right after Claire died. She's conflating any kind of goodbye with permanent loss. I know. I have calls into 3 pediatric therapists. Waiting lists are months long. Then pay for private sessions. You have the money, Marcus. Use it to help your daughter process trauma instead of hoarding it like... She stopped herself, took a breath. I'm sorry. That was out of line. No. Marcus took the pot from her hands, set it in the sink. You're right. I've been so focused on keeping everything stable that I didn't see I was making it worse. He leaned against the counter. Catherine called me today. Said you turned down $50,000. She told you about that? She also said you're helping plan Emma's birthday. The mommy memory day thing that Emma's been dreading for 2 years. Marcus studied her face. Why are you doing all this if you're leaving anyway? Because Emma deserves to celebrate her mother without it feeling like a funeral. Because you deserve to stop treating every moment of happiness like you're betraying Claire's memory. And because even if I'm going to Seattle, I still care about what happens to both of you. Julia. Her name came out rough, weighted. I don't know how to want you and let you go at the same time. Then don't let me go. Just don't make it binary. I'm going to Seattle for school, not disappearing into the witness protection program. She turned to face him fully. Unless you're trying to end this before it becomes something you can't control. Marcus's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly to name. What if loving you feels like replacing her? Then you work through that with your own therapist, instead of punishing both of us for it. Julia softened her voice. I'm not asking you to forget Claire. I'm asking you to let yourself be happy without permission from a ghost. They stood in the kitchen with 3 feet of space between them that felt like 3 miles. When you come back from Seattle, if you come back, Marcus's voice was barely audible. We try this? For real? We're already trying, Marcus. This is real. He crossed the distance between them and kissed her like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth, the taste of coffee on her lips, the way she rose on her toes to meet him. It was the first real kiss between them, not the careful peck on the cheek after Emma's bedtime or the almost touches that had been accumulating for weeks. It was a kiss that acknowledged everything unsaid and everything impossible and everything they were both too afraid to name out loud. When they broke apart, Marcus pressed his forehead to hers. "I love you. I don't know when it happened, but it's true." "I love you too. That's why I'm going. Because you taught me I deserve to become who I'm supposed to be." They stood in his kitchen holding each other while rain fell and Emma slept upstairs, and the future stretched out in front of them like a road with no map. Emma's 7th birthday fell on November 19th, a Saturday that dawned clear and cold with frost on the grass. Julia arrived at the Laurelhurst house at 8 a.m., carrying bags from the craft store and a thermos of hot chocolate. Catherine's car was already in the driveway, and through the window, Julia could see her setting up cake plates in the kitchen. The plan they'd developed over 3 phone calls and 2 in-person meetings was simple. Transform Mommy Memory Day from a grief ritual into a celebration. Plant lavender in the garden with Emma. Bake Claire's favorite lemon cookies. Create a memory box where Emma could add new things whenever she wanted instead of treating Claire's existing box as a shrine that couldn't be touched. Marcus looked wrecked. The particular exhaustion of a parent who'd been up since 5 a.m. with an anxious birthday girl. Emma wore a purple dress with yellow tights and her glasses slightly crooked, and she kept touching the small locket around her neck that Catherine had given her that morning. It was your mother's. Catherine knelt to adjust the clasp. She wore it every day until she couldn't anymore. Now it's yours. Emma opened the locket, saw the tiny photograph inside, Claire laughing, holding baby Emma. Do I have to give it back when I grow up? No, sweetheart. It's yours to keep forever. 2 of Emma's classmates arrived at 9, Sophia and Aidan, both clutching wrapped presents and looking uncertain about whether this party was supposed to be fun or solemn. Julia intercepted them with enthusiasm and hot chocolate, and within 10 minutes had all 3 kids bundled into coats and gloves for the garden planting. They dug holes in the raised bed where Claire's original lavender had died the winter after she passed. Julia let Emma choose where each new plant would go, let her press the soil down with small hands, let her narrate why she was picking each spot. This one goes here because Mommy liked the sun in the morning. This one goes here because it's close to the kitchen window where she could see it. Sophia asked if Emma's mommy was dead, and Emma said yes, very matter-of-factly. And then Aidan said his grandpa was dead too, and sometimes he talked to him in his head. The conversation moved on to whether dead people could hear you if you talked out loud, or if you had to think it really hard, and Julia watched 3 7-year-olds process mortality with the casual pragmatism that adults had long since lost. After the planting, they came inside to bake cookies. Catherine had Claire's recipe cards laid out, lemon sugar cookies with lavender glaze, the same ones Claire used to make every Sunday morning. Emma stood on a step stool and measured flour with intense concentration, while Sophia cracked eggs, and Aidan ate approximately half the sugar before it made it into the bowl. Marcus documented everything with his phone camera, and Julia watched him watch his daughter laugh while covered in flour and surrounded by friends and talking about her mother without crying. Something in his face had loosened, some tension he'd been carrying since Claire died, finally releasing. The cookies came out perfect. Crisp edges, soft centers, glaze that tasted like summer gardens. Emma insisted everyone had to try one and tell her what they thought, and everyone dutifully ate cookies and proclaimed them the best they'd ever had, which might have even been true. After lunch, pizza, because it was a birthday party, and birthday parties required pizza. Emma led everyone to the living room, where Julia had set up the memory activity. Instead of releasing balloons with letters to heaven, they were making a memory garden in a large wooden planter. Each person got to plant a flower and share a memory of Claire or a wish for Emma's future. Catherine went first, planting purple pansies and talking about Claire's terrible singing voice and her excellent heart. Marcus planted white roses and talked about the first time he'd seen Claire at the farmer's market, how she'd bought his entire inventory of baby food because she believed in him before anyone else did. Sophia and Aidan planted wildflowers and said they wished Emma would always be their friend. Emma planted lavender in the center of everything and spoke directly to the flowers like they could carry messages. "Mommy, I have a new friend who smells like you. I think you'd like her. Her name is Miss Julia, and she's going away to school, but she promised to come back. I believe her." Julia's vision blurred. She planted forget-me-nots around Emma's lavender, blue flowers that symbolized remembrance and return, and whispered her own promise, too quietly for anyone but Emma to hear. "I'll come back. I promise." That evening, after the other kids went home and the dishes were clean, and Catherine had left with a long hug for Julia and a whispered, "Thank you for giving me my granddaughter back," Marcus put Emma to bed and returned to find Julia packing up craft supplies in the kitchen. "She asked me if her mother would be proud of her." Marcus leaned in the doorway. First time she's asked that without crying. Just curious. Like it was a normal question about a person who exists somewhere she can't see. "What did you tell her?" "That Claire is watching her become brave and kind and smart, and that pride doesn't begin to cover it." He moved into the kitchen, helped Julia load supplies into bags. "You did that. You and Catherine. You made it safe for Emma to love her mother without drowning in grief." "Emma did that. She was ready to remember without hurting. She just needed permission." Marcus caught Julia's hand as she reached for a package of tissue paper. "Come with me. I want to show you something." He led her to his home office, a room Julia had only glimpsed in passing, all dark wood and leather furniture and filing cabinets full of Heart Foods business. But on the desk, pushed to the side of the laptop and quarterly reports, was a small wooden box with Claire's name carved on the lid. The same box Emma had shown Julia weeks ago. "Emma brought this to me last night. Said she wanted me to have it so I could remember too." Marcus opened the box carefully. Inside were Claire's wedding rings, a dried lavender sprig, the hospital bracelet from Emma's birth, a folded letter in Claire's handwriting. The letter is, Claire wrote it the week before she died. Instructions for how to raise Emma, what values to teach her, what stories to tell her, how to help her remember without making the memories painful. He pulled out the letter, unfolded it to the last paragraph, handed it to Julia. The handwriting was shaky but legible. "When you fall in love again, and you will, Marcus, please let yourself. Make sure she's someone who loves Emma as fiercely as I do. Someone who sees her as a whole person, not just a ghost's daughter. Someone who will help her remember me without competing with my memory. If you find that person, don't let your guilt push her away. Love is not a finite resource. Emma can love both of us, and so can you." Julia's hands shook as she gave the letter back. "She gave you permission. She gave me a roadmap, but I was too afraid to follow it until you showed up and started building your own path without asking for directions." Marcus folded the letter, returned it to the box. "I'm terrified of you leaving. Terrified you'll meet someone in Seattle who doesn't have a daughter and a dead wife and a kitchen full of ghosts. Terrified you'll realize you deserve easier than this. I don't want easier. I want you. Both of you. The complicated, messy, grief-marked version of this life. Julia pulled him close. But I also want the scholarship and the career and the version of myself that isn't just surviving paycheck to paycheck. Can I have both? I don't know, but I think we should try. They kissed again, slower this time, less desperate and more certain. When they pulled apart, Marcus retrieved something from his desk drawer, a small velvet box that made Julia's heart stop. It's not what you think. He opened the box to reveal a delicate silver bracelet with a single charm, a tiny stethoscope. Emma picked it out. She said you needed something to remind you to come back to us, even when you're learning how to save other people's kids. Julia let him fasten the bracelet around her wrist, felt the weight of the charm settle against her pulse point. Tell her thank you. Tell her I promise. Tell her yourself. You're not leaving for 7 more weeks. They spent those 7 weeks building a foundation for long distance. Marcus visited Julia's studio apartment for the first time and understood in a single glance why she'd been hesitant to let him see how she lived. The futon that served as both couch and bed, the kitchenette with 2 working burners and a mini-fridge, the bathroom where the shower leaked and the landlord refused to fix it. He didn't comment, just helped her start packing the things she'd need for Seattle and discreetly paid 3 months of her rent in advance when she wasn't looking. Julia spent Thanksgiving with Marcus, Emma, and Catherine in the Laurelhurst house, eating turkey that Marcus had somehow both overcooked and undercooked simultaneously, and pumpkin pie that Catherine had brought from a bakery because she'd learned her limits. Emma insisted Julia sit between her and Marcus, and during grace added, "And thank you for bringing Julia back from the hospital before she goes to Seattle, like she promised." Julia corrected her gently. "I'm going to Seattle for school, Sweet Pea, not the hospital." "But you'll come back? Promise? Promise. Christmas came with plans for Julia to visit during the program's winter break. Emma made Julia a friendship bracelet with purple and yellow beads, insisted she wear it at all times, and made her swear on the teddy bear that she'd call every single night, even if she was tired. The night before Julia left for Seattle, Marcus took her to the same restaurant where they'd first met. The same table by the window, the same candles flickering in the dim light, but this time 3 chairs instead of Julia sitting alone. Emma ordered spaghetti and got sauce on her dress within 30 seconds. Marcus ordered salmon and spent most of dinner cutting it into smaller pieces for Emma when she decided she wanted to try Daddy's fish instead. Julia ordered the mushroom pasta not because someone had bought it for her to rescue her from humiliation, but because she wanted it and could afford it now. 3 years ago, I sat at this table by myself thinking I was invisible. Julia looked at Emma, at Marcus, at the waiter who'd recognized them and smiled. Now I see myself. That's the difference. Emma pulled a folded paper from her backpack, a drawing of 3 people at a dinner table, just like the ones she'd drawn before. But this time there was a 4th figure sketched lightly above them, not at the table, but present. Small, feminine, made of lavender-colored crayon. That's Mommy. She's not sitting with us, but she's still here, watching. Julia and Marcus both went still. Catherine, who'd arrived for dessert as a surprise, pressed her hand to her mouth and let tears fall openly. That's the wisest thing I've ever heard. Catherine sat down, pulled Emma into a hug. Your mother would be so proud of the girl you're becoming. They ate birthday cake, because the restaurant had brought one out when Emma mentioned she was practicing being 7.5, and made toasts with sparkling cider. Emma toasted to Miss Julia coming back. Marcus toasted to new beginnings that honored old love. Catherine toasted to second chances and the women brave enough to take them. Julia toasted to showing up, to waiting, to believing that love could survive distance and grief and the terrifying vulnerability of letting people see you. The Seattle program was exactly as intense as advertised. Julia moved into campus housing, a shared suite with 3 other nursing students, all of whom were at least 5 years younger, and none of whom understood why Julia woke at 5 a.m. to call a 6-year-old in Portland before school started. Classes ran 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. 4 days a week, with clinical rotations at Seattle Children's Hospital filling the other 3 days. Evening seminars covered pediatric pharmacology, developmental psychology, family systems in healthcare. Julia studied obsessively, took notes in 3 different colored pens, stayed up until midnight memorizing drug interactions and developmental milestones. She called Emma every night at 7 p.m. Portland time, read bedtime stories over FaceTime, listened to elaborate descriptions of first-grade social dynamics and spelling tests and the class hamster's new babies. Emma showed Julia every drawing, every gold star, every loose tooth. Julia showed Emma her dorm room, her textbooks, the view from the library window. Marcus called less frequently, but stayed on the phone longer when he did. Late-night conversations when Emma was asleep and Julia was too wired from studying to rest. They talked about Heart Food's expansion plans, about Julia's clinical rotations, about the strange intimacy of missing someone, while also wanting them to succeed in their absence. Emma's therapist says she's making progress. Still has abandonment fears, but she's learning to express them instead of just acting out. Marcus sounded tired. She told her therapist that Miss Julia is in Seattle learning how to save kids like the ones in her hospital who have sick blood. That's actually pretty accurate. She also told her therapist that when you come back, you're going to marry her daddy, and they'll all live together and have a dog named Lavender. Julia's breath caught. What did you say? I said we'd have to ask Miss Julia about that when she finishes school. A pause. But I didn't say no. February brought midterms and a week-long clinical intensive where Julia worked 36-hour rotations and survived on coffee and adrenaline. She missed 3 of Emma's nightly calls because she was in surgery observation, missed a planned video date with Marcus because she fell asleep at her desk at 8 p.m. and didn't wake until morning. When she finally called back, Emma was inconsolable. You forgot about me. You're not coming back. I didn't forget, Sweet Pea. I was helping doctors with a very sick little boy, and I couldn't leave him. Did he die like Mommy? No, he's going to be okay. But he needed me to stay with him, like you needed me to stay when you had a fever. Emma was quiet for a long time. Okay, but you have to call tomorrow. Promise, promise. Promise, promise. Julia called every day for the next week, even when she had to step out of seminars or skip lunch to do it. Her roommates complained about the constant phone calls. Julia ignored them. Spring break came in late March, and Julia took the Greyhound bus back to Portland because she couldn't afford the flight, and Marcus had offered to pay, but she'd refused. The 3-hour trip became 4 when they hit traffic, then 5 when the bus had mechanical issues. And by the time Julia arrived at the Portland bus station, she was 6 hours late, and Marcus was pacing the parking lot with Emma, practically vibrating with anxiety. Emma saw her first, screamed, "Miss Julia!" loud enough that several other passengers turned to stare, and launched herself at Julia with enough force to nearly knock her over. Julia dropped her bag and caught the small body, held on while Emma cried and laughed, and demanded to know why Julia was so late, and whether the bus almost crashed, and if she was staying forever now. "Just for a week, Sweet Pea. Then I have to go back to finish my classes." "But you came back, like you promised." "Like I promised." Marcus drove them to his house, where Catherine had prepared enough food for a small army. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, 3 different vegetables, homemade rolls, apple pie still warm from the oven. They ate family style at the kitchen table, Emma chattering non-stop about everything Julia had missed: the new monkey bars at school, the science project about plant growth, the way Aiden had gotten in trouble for putting glue in Sophia's hair. After Emma went to bed, Julia and Marcus sat on the back porch in the March cold, wrapped in a blanket, not talking much because they didn't need to. The silence held its own conversation. Relief, longing, the strange distance that had grown between them even as they'd stayed connected. "You look tired." Marcus touched the shadows under her eyes. "I am tired, but I'm learning things I never knew I needed to learn. How to advocate for families when doctors are dismissive. How to spot the difference between normal childhood pain and something serious. How to be the person a scared kid trusts when everything hurts." Julia leaned into him. "I'm becoming the nurse I always wanted to be." "I'm proud of you, even though I'm not here." "Especially because you're not here. You chose yourself. That's not something you did before." They sat in the dark, holding each other, until Marcus pulled back and studied her face. "When you finish the program in June, what happens then?" "I come back. I already accepted a position at Portland General, Pediatric Oncology Unit, Nurse Manager track. Starts July 1st. Julia had planned to wait to tell him, wanted it to be a surprise, but the words came out now because she needed him to know. "I'm coming back, Marcus. I was always coming back." His eyes filled. "You accepted a job? You're sure?" "I'm sure. Seattle is where I learned to be who I'm supposed to be. Portland is where I want to live that life." Marcus kissed her like she'd just told him the sun would rise tomorrow, like she'd promised something he'd been afraid to hope for. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "Will you move in with us? You and Emma and me and Catherine on holidays, and maybe eventually a dog named Lavender?" "Are you asking me to move in? Or are you asking me something else?" "I'm asking you to build a life with us, however that looks, whatever that means." He pulled back slightly. "I don't have a ring yet. Emma insisted she needs to help pick it out because it has to have purple somewhere." "Yes," Julia cut him off. "Yes to moving in. Yes to building a life. Yes to Emma helping pick the ring. Yes to all of it." They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside, made coffee they didn't drink, talked until 2 a.m. about logistics and lease breaking and whether Julia's futon was worth moving or if they should just donate it. Marcus showed her the spare bedroom that could become her office, the closet space he'd already cleared, the drawer in the bathroom where her toothbrush could live. Julia spent the rest of spring break alternating between quality time with Emma and apartment hunting with Marcus for a place that could fit all 3 of them more comfortably than the Laurelhurst house. They found a renovated Victorian in Irvington with 4 bedrooms, a yard big enough for a garden and a dog, and a front porch with a swing. The rent was more than Julia made in 2 months, but Marcus pointed out they'd be splitting expenses now, and Julia forced herself to accept that partnership meant letting someone help carry the financial weight. Emma picked out her bedroom, purple walls, obviously, with space for all her stuffed animals and her mother's memory box and the new bookshelf Marcus promised to build. She also picked out what would become Julia's office. Yellow walls, she declared, because yellow was happy, and Miss Julia needed happy when she was doing important nurse work. The week ended too quickly. Julia packed her bag Sunday night while Emma clung to her leg and begged her not to go back to Seattle. Marcus extracted Emma gently, reminded her that Miss Julia had to finish school so she could come back for real in June, and Emma subsided into resigned sniffles. At the bus station, Emma made Julia pinky promise 17 separate things: that she'd call every night, that she'd come back in June, that she'd remember Emma's birthday in November, that she'd never forget the moon song, that she'd love Emma even when she was far away. "I promise all of it." Julia knelt to Emma's level. "You're stuck with me, sweet pea. Forever." "Even when I'm a grown-up?" "Even when you're a grown-up." The final 10 weeks of the program blurred together: clinical rotations in the pediatric ICU, capstone project on survivorship care for childhood cancer patients, final exams that required memorizing pharmaceutical interactions and developmental milestones and family systems theory. Julia studied 18 hours a day, slept 4, called Emma every night without fail, even when she was so exhausted she could barely form sentences. Her capstone defense was scheduled for May 15th, a presentation to a faculty panel explaining her research on how nursing interventions could improve long-term outcomes for pediatric oncology survivors. She'd spent 6 months on the project, interviewed 50 families, analyzed hundreds of pages of medical records. The night before her defense, Marcus called at 11 p.m. Seattle time. "I know you're probably studying, but Emma wanted to do something for you, for your big presentation tomorrow." He switched to video call, and Emma appeared on screen wearing her purple pajamas and holding a poster board covered in drawings and stickers. "I made you a good luck poster. It has purple flowers for bravery and gold stars for being the best nurse, and a picture of you with your stethoscope saving kids." Emma held up the poster, beaming. "Daddy's going to mail it to you, but I wanted you to see it now so you know we're thinking about you." Julia's throat closed. "Thank you, sweet pea. That's the most beautiful poster I've ever seen. Are you going to win tomorrow?" "It's not really about winning. It's about showing my teachers what I learned." "You're going to win." Emma's certainty was absolute. "Because you're the smartest, and you work really hard, and you love kids like me." Julia defended her capstone the next morning, running on 3 hours of sleep and sheer determination. The faculty panel asked her to clarify her methodology, questioned her sample size, pushed back on her conclusions about the role of nursing advocacy in family-centered care. She answered every question with citations and data and the kind of confidence that came from knowing her research was sound. When the panel chair announced that she'd passed with honors, Julia called Marcus from the hallway outside the conference room and cried so hard she could barely speak. Graduation was held in a sports arena with 3,000 other nursing students and their families. Julia walked alone because the ceremony was on a Thursday and Marcus couldn't take time off work, and Emma had school. She sat in the designated section for students without guests, watched families around her take photos and cheer, and told herself it was fine. Then she heard her name, not from the stage, but from the audience. She turned and saw Marcus climbing over seats in a suit and tie, Emma in a purple dress scrambling behind him, and Catherine following with considerably more dignity. They'd driven 3 hours, pulled Emma out of school, sat in traffic for 45 minutes to get here in time. Emma held a sign that said, "Our nurse is the best nurse," in purple crayon, with approximately 50 gold stars glued to it. Catherine held flowers. Marcus held a small wrapped box that Julia suspected contained a ring. When Julia's name was called to receive her diploma, Emma screamed so loud the dean paused mid-handshake to smile. Julia walked across that stage with her family watching, accepted her Bachelor of Science in Nursing with pediatric oncology specialization, and understood for the first time what it meant to be seen. She found them afterward in the crowd, and Emma launched herself into Julia's arms with enough force to nearly knock her over for the second time. Marcus wrapped his arms around both of them, and Catherine took approximately 600 photos on her phone. "You came." Julia couldn't stop saying it. "You drove all this way. You came." "Of course we came." Marcus kissed her forehead. "This is your graduation. We're your family. Where else would we be?" They took Julia to dinner at a seafood restaurant overlooking Puget Sound, celebratory and expensive, and entirely Marcus's idea. Emma ordered shrimp and declared it the best shrimp in the entire world, despite having never had shrimp before. Catherine toasted to Julia's achievement and to the granddaughter she'd gained, rather than the daughter-in-law she'd lost. Marcus ordered champagne for the adults and sparkling cider for Emma, and they clinked glasses while the sun set over the water. After dinner, walking along the waterfront while Emma chased seagulls, Marcus pulled out the small wrapped box Julia had noticed earlier. Emma helped pick it out, insisted it needed to have purple. He handed her the box. "This isn't... I know we've already talked about moving in together and building a life, but I wanted to make it official. If you'll have us." Julia opened the box to find a ring, white gold band with a small diamond surrounded by tiny purple sapphires. It was delicate and practical and perfect, exactly what she would have chosen if she'd been choosing for herself. "Yes, obviously yes." She held out her hand, and Marcus slid the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. "Did you really think I'd say no?" "I thought maybe you'd realize in Seattle that you could have easier than this. Someone without a daughter and a dead wife and a kitchen full of ghosts." His voice was rough. Someone who wasn't carrying so much history. "I don't want easier. I want you. Both of you. All of you." Julia pulled him close. "History and ghosts and purple-obsessed first graders included." Emma appeared at their side, noticed the ring, and screamed. "You said yes! We're going to be a family! Can we get the dog now?" "Not tonight, Sweet Pea." Marcus lifted her up. "But soon. When Miss Julia moves back to Portland, we'll get a dog named Lavender." "Promise, promise?" "Promise, promise." They drove back to Portland that night because Julia's lease in Seattle ended the next day, and everything she owned fit in the trunk of Marcus's car. She fell asleep in the passenger seat somewhere south of Olympia, woke up when they pulled into the Irvington House driveway, the Victorian they'd looked at in March, now officially theirs as of June 1st. Emma had fallen asleep in the back seat, clutching her "best nurse" sign. Marcus carried her inside, settled her in the purple bedroom with its new furniture and fresh paint, then returned to help Julia unload her life from the trunk. It took 3 trips to carry everything inside: clothes, textbooks, the futon she'd insisted on keeping despite Marcus's protests, boxes of nursing supplies and kitchen equipment, and the teddy bear Emma had given her as a going-away present. Julia stood in the living room of the house that would become theirs, surrounded by boxes and furniture and the physical evidence that she was really doing this. "Welcome home." Marcus pulled her close, and Julia let herself sink into the embrace, into the certainty that she'd made the right choice. Seattle for 14 months to become who she needed to be. Portland forever to live the life she deserved. 3 months later, on a crisp September evening, Hart Foods hosted a product launch event on the rooftop of their headquarters. Investors, staff, media representatives, and a handful of carefully selected guests gathered among string lights and potted herbs to celebrate the newest addition to the company's lineup. Julia stood near the back in a navy dress Marcus had bought her over her protests, trying not to feel out of place among people whose watches cost more than her first car. Emma held her hand, wearing a purple dress with yellow tights and a flower crown she'd insisted was appropriate for fancy parties. Marcus took the microphone and the crowd quieted. "Thank you all for coming. 2 years ago, I watched someone sit alone in a restaurant, hungry and humiliated, and I realized we'd been thinking about food all wrong. We design products for parents who read nutrition labels, but we forget about the people those products are meant to serve. The families struggling to feed their kids with dignity. The single mothers choosing between groceries and rent. The children who deserve better than we're giving them." He clicked to the next slide, packaging for a new product line. Simple design, muted colors, and a name that made Julia's chest tighten. Her first spoon, nourishing dignity, one meal at a time. The packaging showed a silhouette of a woman holding a child, feeding them with care and attention. The back of each package listed not just ingredients and nutrition facts, but also resources, food banks, WIC enrollment, pediatric nutrition hotlines. "This line is inspired by someone who taught me that hunger isn't just physical, it's emotional. It's the humiliation of not being able to feed yourself, the fear of being seen as less than because you're struggling. The dignity we strip from people when we make poverty visible." Marcus's voice caught. "Every product in this line is sold at cost. Every dollar of profit goes to nursing scholarships for low-income students pursuing pediatric specializations. The first scholarship is named for Claire Morrison Hart, in honor of a mother who believed everyone deserves care, regardless of their ability to pay." Catherine, standing near the front, pressed her hand to her mouth and let tears fall openly. Julia felt her own eyes burn, felt Emma squeeze her hand. "The second scholarship is named for Julia Morgan Hart." He looked directly at her across the crowded rooftop. "My wife, Emma's bonus mom, and the woman who showed me that love isn't a finite resource. You can honor the past and build the future. You can remember someone and still let yourself be happy. You can hold space for grief and joy at the same time." Emma tugged Julia's hand. "Daddy called you his wife, but you're not married yet." "Not yet, sweet pea. In 3 weeks." The wedding was small, botanical garden ceremony, 30 guests, lavender everywhere. Emma served as flower girl in a purple dress she'd picked out herself, scattering petals with intense concentration. Catherine walked Julia down the aisle because Julia's mother was gone and her father had never been present, and Catherine had become something like the family Julia had always wanted. Marcus cried when he saw her, and his vows were simple. "I promise to see you, to let you go when you need to grow, to welcome you home when you return, and to never let you be invisible again." Julia's vows were equally straightforward. "I promise to show up, to wait, to believe, to honor the love that came before me and build the love that comes after." They exchanged rings, Julia's with purple sapphires, Marcus's a simple gold band, and kissed while Emma cheered and Catherine took photos, and the small gathering of family and friends celebrated two people who'd found each other in a moment of mutual desperation and built something steady from the wreckage. The reception was held in the same botanical garden, at tables scattered among flowering plants and trailing vines. The first dance was La Vie en Rose, Claire's song, the one she'd danced to with Marcus on their anniversaries. Emma cut in halfway through, insisting she needed to dance too, and Marcus lifted her while Julia held both their hands. Catherine gave a toast. "My daughter would have loved you. She would have seen your strength, your compassion, your refusal to let life beat you down, and she would have been grateful that Emma has another mother who sees her so clearly." She raised her glass. "To Julia, for loving my granddaughter fiercely enough to let her remember the mother she lost, and for loving my son-in-law bravely enough to build something new from grief." 5 years later, Julia stood in the kitchen of the Irvington house, making school lunches for Emma and her younger sister Lily. Emma was 12 now, volunteering at Portland General's pediatric wing after school, talking about maybe becoming a doctor, or maybe a nurse, or maybe running a company like her dad. Lily was 3, purple glasses like her sisters, an obsession with fire trucks that defied all attempts to redirect her toward traditionally feminine interests. Marcus came downstairs carrying Lily, who'd refused to get dressed because she wanted to wear her firefighter costume to preschool. He'd negotiated her into regular clothes with the promise that she could wear the helmet in the car. Your daughter is exhausting. Our daughter. You helped make her. Julia handed him a travel mug of coffee.
And you love it. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, backpack slung over one shoulder, holding her phone.
Guess what? Mrs. Henderson from first grade just had a baby. Can I go visit her at the hospital after school? If you finish your homework first. Julia zipped Emma's lunch into her backpack. And text me when you get there. I always text you. You're worse than Dad about checking in. Emma rolled her eyes, but smiled. Love you. See you after school. After Emma left and Lily was delivered to preschool and the house fell quiet, Julia stood in the kitchen drinking coffee and looking at the memory garden in the planter by the window. The lavender Emma had planted for Claire was thriving, surrounded by forget-me-nots and purple pansies and white roses. A new addition from Lily, dandelions, because she'd insisted yellow flowers were important too. Marcus found her there, wrapped his arms around her from behind.
What are you thinking about?
How 3 years ago I sat in a restaurant thinking I was invisible. Now I'm standing in our kitchen in our house with our daughters and our life, and I see myself everywhere I look. You were never invisible. You were just waiting for the right people to notice. Julia turned in his arms, kissed him like they had all the time in the world, because they did. Thank you for noticing. Thank you for staying. Marcus pulled her close. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for choosing us, even when it was complicated and messy and full of ghosts. The ghosts are family now, too. They stood in their kitchen while morning light poured through the windows and the memory garden bloomed, and somewhere in the city, Emma was learning to save lives, and Lily was probably explaining firefighter procedures to her preschool teacher with the same intense focus she brought to everything. Some people were born into families. Others were chosen, and some, the lucky ones, got to build families from the broken pieces of their own hearts, from the courage to show up when it mattered, from the radical act of letting yourself be seen.